So to me, that's really exciting that Gertum is doing this. I'm going to speak about a sponsor just because I saw it. Um, okay. All right. I'll maybe ask me afterwards. Well, I'll speak about it really quick. So we have this thing where we count carbon credits, right? Like, oh, how many carbon credits are you spending? But with renewable power and reusable power, solar and wind and batteries, we don't really need to. And the real promise of the future is total electrification, not reducing carbon credits, and doing that in a way that's sustainable. So it's exciting to see companies like Gertum here doing that. So thank you for everything that you all are doing. Okay, let's see. Can you see that? Does that cut off? Kind of. I think we're okay. All right, let's get started. All right, so hey, I'm here. I made it. I'm super excited. Oh yeah, I said thank you already to the PyCon team, and we gave them a cheer. Okay, so getting back to Lithuania, this is my first time here, and it's incredibly special to me and my family because my family left here over 100 years ago. Is this being recorded? So reading between the lines of my great-grandfather's autobiography is he was a itinerant music teacher who left Lithuania to find a bold new future in the U.S. as a dentist. That's the public family view, but the way I read between it is he was a music teacher who upset some of his students' parents, and fled Lithuania so he wouldn't. Yeah, so he could live another year. So, sorry, Mom, that's how I read it. But yeah, we're back, and my daughter's traveled a bit. She's 5, and we've never seen her so excited as she is here in Lithuania. So thank you, Lithuania, and to the PyCon hosts. My mother loves, and I'm going to butcher the name, Shartabarshke. I'm so sorry. I haven't tried it yet. If someone wants to be with me and record my experience while I try it, that'd be great. My wife and daughter might be here later, but I'm okay doing it before then. All right, so let's do this. Let's go into my quarter century of Python mistakes and errors. So about these errors, some of these are mine. And some of them are really embarrassing. So what that means is, one, you get to learn a little bit about me that I've never said or written about before, but more importantly is, because I'm exposing some of my own mistakes, I'm taking the liberty to expose some other mistakes that other people have done. Some of these I went on to fix. Some of these I'm in the process of trying to address. And some of these, for better or for worse, are ongoing. So the first one is the missed opportunity of a lifetime. So this is me in 1999. I had the best hair. It was long and luxurious. If it was wet, it would go down to, the small of my back. I had like these beautiful, I don't know, is this a Lithuanian curl thing? But yeah, it was beautiful hair. People would just tell me, oh, you have the nicest hair. So I got an interview schedule. I was a junior developer working out of Washington, D.C. For a number of U.S. DoD contracts, and it was okay. I was working with Java and FoxPro. Wasn't, I liked the idea of coding, but I always felt something escaped me. But I got an interview at a Python company, and that sounded pretty cool. Python was this new weird thing. And specifically, I could have worked at ZopeCorp in 1999. And however, this is 1999, and again, I had the most beautiful hair. So in Python at the time, as I kind of hinted at, was this weird, obscure language. And real people... It's showing presenter notes? Yeah. I don't have presenter notes. No. It's half a screen. Oh, it's half a screen. Yeah. I think you want to switch. Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. Let's see if we can correct this. Come on. And I cannot see the mouse. Well, this is unfortunate. What's that? Right, but unfortunately I can't see the mouse to like figure out where things are because that's on the other screen. Hold on. So, here we go. Nope, that's not it. Okay. Still. Anyone good at this?
It was fine. You can continue that way.
Yeah, it was fine. I think.
Yeah, just continue with the presenter notes. That's fine.
We will look more at you than at slides.
Okay.
Good enough.
All right, good enough. All right, let's do this. Oops. Let's do this. Okay, so at the time, this is when Java Enterprise was king. And all the big and small companies are excited about it. And if you know anything about Java, especially, well, not Java itself, but enterprise Java is unnecessary. Complexity is often considered a virtue. And the architecture is composited with XML. And things that aren't architecture are also composited with XML. And so a senior developer at the time said Python, going to Python would be a mistake. Stick with Java. Stick with what we know will work. And there's also the issue that getting from Washington, D.C. to Fredericksburg, Virginia for the interview would have been a long hike for me. At the time, I didn't have a car. But I could have done it. I mean, there was public transit even in the U.S. But I canceled the interview. I was like, this Python thing, it's obscure, who cares? And but I missed out on something. And I know some of you might have figured out where I'm leading with this. So at the time, Zope was hiring most of the Python devs in the world, and especially the really good ones. And so at the same time, they were calling me in to interview as a junior developer. They were calling in this guy to become a team member too. So yeah, this is what I lost by giving up an opportunity. And what's crazy is, and they would have hired me, even though I was a junior developer, they were, because the language and tools were new and they're trying to build an industry, they would have lifted me up. I've been told this. And yeah, so I could have had Guido as a mentor. And yeah, that was, that was indeed the missed opportunity of a lifetime. So the lesson that I learned from this is always go to the interview and don't listen to people who dismiss Python. And now in 2024, we don't have to really worry about that second point. But sometimes we do. I've heard people say, well, Python doesn't handle tail curve recursion. I know I'm butchering the term. What's that? Thank you. But I do hear that sometimes when people are trying to get their own tooling in. All right, the second mistake is unnecessary sophistication. So let's return to Zope, and specifically what I like to call the age of Zope. I'm going to do a quick survey, because this is important. How many of you people have heard of Zope? Okay, this is actually better than I anticipated. Which, well, you're going to find out why. So Zope was a consulting company. They wanted to hire me, and they did hire Guido, to my regret. But they're also a pioneering web framework. And for example, URL routing, they invented. It was invented in the late 90s by Jim Fulton, I think. And yeah, so if you're used to how things are on the right, which is like the Django and Fast API way, instead of on the left, which is the old school or the modern Next.js way, then yeah, this is how URL routing was done. They also had built-in admin, not unlike Django and the new Fast API project template thing. They also had a NoSQL database that they created, which was literally a Python object super optimized and powered by B trees. So if you knew B trees, it would actually be useful in your job if you were working with Zope, which was kind of cool. And they had typing and a bunch of other things that are standard today, Zope pioneered. So it's a pretty cool thing. And on top of that, Zope dominated the Python space. If you did web with Python, you were doing it with Zope pretty much. There really wasn't an alternative. No one did anything except for obscure side projects that weren't paid attention to. And early Zope was so dominant that PyCon had a Zope track, like the first few PyCons. What's that? Yeah, it did. So Zope dominated Python, a level that we can't even conceive now. Like, I know if you go to Python or PyCon here, there's going to be a lot of stuff with data science, some stuff with the web, but really data science, machine learning, and the growing scope of AI. But none of it will dominate the way that Zope did. So what happened? Why is it that the majority of people here have never heard of Zope? So remember, it was created when being complex and sophisticated was awesome. That it didn't matter what you're actually trying to do. What mattered was how complicated your code got. And the problem with this is that any problem, if you're building something that's overly sophisticated, any problem that you incur will stop things cold because you're struggling with your own code rather than the business logic. And in fact, I have a story. I worked at NASA for a number of years. We interviewed this guy. He came in super confident, and he told us that he built, or he learned, built, and deployed a complex Zope app within a month. And we were just like, nope, he's lying. He's done. And here's why. So remember, it's a complex framework, and whenever you have anything with too much complexity, it makes small problems so much harder. So here, if you look at this is, let's say I'm playing around with date, times, and forms, and I need to have some validation against date, time, and also a text field. This is actually a subtle error, a gotcha, that was really, really frustrating. This is title case. And this is camel case. And this is the sort of thing that was all over Zope. Maybe they fixed it since then, I don't know. But yeah, it was hard. So, and also as I mentioned, that you composited stuff in XML. This is how you made things public in Zope. Whereas compared to now with Django class-based views, I should have put a Fast API version of this on this page. Maybe if I give this talk again. But as you can see, one of the things about the Django or the modern Python approach is by having the behaviors attached to the views or whatever object, it doesn't have to be a view, it could be a model, it could be anything. But the important thing is it's all in one place. You can look at it. But with Zope, by placing it in a separate location, it just added to the cognitive overload for reading code. So what that meant is the easy things got hard, and the hard things were, I say nigh impossible, but no, they were impossible. And to get good at it, you had to spend a lot of time getting good at it. If you wanted to get good at Fast API enough that you could build something serious, we're talking a few days to a few weeks, depending on your level of experience. With Django, yeah, it's going to be a bit longer. But it's not years. And this was a dialogue that we saw again and again. I'm wondering if this guy who keeps nodding at some of the Zope side, how he feels about this one, which is, hey, this Zope stuff is hard, the docs are incomplete, and then the core contributors, Zope would say, take my paid class. Expensive paid class, like thousands of dollars for a week of training. And then then we would say, well, there's all this XML. Can we not use it? Can we just like add attributes with Python? Well, sure. And the way we're going to handle that is by adding more of the stuff you don't want. And this kept happening. And finally, we gave up. We were like, you know what? Let's go use something else. And we drifted away. And it was sad, but it happens. And for the most part, we drifted to Django. Now people just go right to Fast API. But the really horrific thing for Zope, wow, you can see the notes there, is the community just started skipping Zope. So the lesson learned from this is if you are basing your business model off of complexity, that's bad. And I know a lot of you here, especially the newer developers, are like, well, why would you do this? And just watch out for it in the years to come. And then also if you are overcomplicating your projects to sell training and consulting and stuff like that, that can backfire. That's what happened to Zope. Okay, let's move on. Third mistake. You can see we're jumping into overly clever hacks. So this is mine. This is my super embarrassing mistake. I'm actually really nervous talking about this one because I've never told anyone about this. So I was receiving variables from a vendor where true, if things pass, it was 0. If it was false, it was 1. So I assigned it to variables called true and false, all lowercase. Because, I mean, true and false, the regular version are uppercase. This should be simple, right? I mean, if you look at this chart, I don't know how well you can see it because, yeah, I have the notes at the bottom. There's, the true and false are, like if you look at the difference, like the chart should make it clear. Probably not. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so maybe this makes it a little bit better, where the upper, I can't even begin to articulate like how this works. And it's so simple, right? And in my head when I was coding it, it made so much sense. But now when I try to articulate it, and I have notes that I memorize on this, and I'm like, so apprehensive about sharing this that so this is my clever hack. And you can look at it, and this is code that I lifted off source code or what I remember the source code. And these are both truthy values that are being evaluated. And this is nightmarish. And if you notice, there's no way to really see these. These are kind of hidden. And so what happened? I broke production. A lot. It was so bad. And it was so bad, and fixing it was hard. It was so bad it's taking me 17 years to come out and say, hey, look, please don't do this. Don't reinvent Booleans. But it was clever, right? It's like little true-false variables. The modern approach would be to use enums and assign values that don't look like positive, like don't look like they're truthy values. I mean, I guess positive and negative kind of are, but they're also all caps. You can see this is what I did back in the day, and this is how I do it now. It's much easier to see that, hey, this is just a status value. It's just an enum, and you don't need to worry about whether or not it's truthy. And so that this is the good modern approach that you should be taking. Well, this is really hard. Maybe I shouldn't have done this one, but it's out there, so it's done. So what did I learn from this? I did learn some really valuable lessons. If you can't easily read Python code, you're making a mistake. And when you look at Python code, you shouldn't be drinking, taking caffeine tablets, drinking Monster, or going for long walks so you can figure out not the business logic, but the Python code. And also, and the reason why is because, again, if business logic is just going to be sophisticated. If your requirements are really complex or regulatory stuff, then don't make your code complex. Make it as simple as you can. All right, fourth mistake. Okay, so I'm gonna get into Django cleverness, because if you remember Zope got clever, well, Django's gotten clever too. Um, who here has seen the original Jurassic Park? It's such an incredible movie. I got to see it in the cinema. I'm old enough to have done that, and it was mind-blowing. So the mathematician or chaotician, Ian Malcolm, brilliant character, raised, and I'm going to paraphrase it, he said, just because you can build a thing doesn't mean that you should. So let's get into the cleverness of the 2012 Django era. So the first thing that was happening were, and I saw people advocating this in different places, is, oh, just, for installing your apps, which is how you know how models are going to be constructed, like what SQL, create table, drop table, modify table, all these things are done in installed apps. Well, let's control that with a SQL query. And so this has a tendency to break in deployment, in the deployment process, and in ways you don't want. So a better approach is to build a proper plugin system. Removing none. Tony Hoare, who invented Algol, and Marco's nodding, he wrote null pointer exceptions are billion-dollar mistake. And in the early 60s, he invented what in Python we would call none. So let's say you have a value or a variable, and you have a true and a false, which means that you know things are true and false. Well, null would mean that, hey, you don't really know, or none would mean that. But he calls it, he apologized later and said, hey, it was a mistake for me to create this concept. And I'm not going to argue whether or not he's correct, because he's a pioneer in computer science. But this isn't what you want to do to replace none in Python. You don't want to create a wrapper object with 50 lines of code that include logging and debug and other tooling. Because to make it work properly, you have to wrap every Python standard library, function, or object, or any callable that could return none with this. And you also need to do that with every Python package you install. And so that means your code there is touching everything, and which means any obscure edge case that typically would never turn up is going to turn up, and also that's going to trigger bottlenecks, and we saw that quite a bit in this era. So what we do in Python is we don't worry about. We just use none and move on. And I know that there's some exceptions, like with pandas or polars, where we do have to worry about it. But we shouldn't worry about it. Okay, cache-powered Django concrete models. Who knows what concrete models are in Django? Oh, yes. Okay, I'm going to give you some advice. Don't go and learn them. Really, 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 really. Like, just stay away from concrete model inheritance. But basically, the way concrete models work in Django is you have a parent table, and then you have a child table that duplicates it and might have its own fields on top of it. And if that sounds kind of weird and complex, you don't know the beginning of it. It's very magical in terms of what I mean by magical is you get unexpected behaviors. And because you're duplicating data, you're breaking normalization, you will have a significant performance overhead. You're giving up all the virtues of relational databases to a weird, obscure edge case. So that it remains in Django core is mind-boggling that we can still bring it in and use it. The solution, though, that people came up was caching. That, hey, like, what is the rule? Like 80% of, optimizing applications is caching and indexing. Well, let's apply that. However, Phil Carlton says that there's two things hard in computer science: naming and cache invalidation. So what would happen is people would take this approach, their users wouldn't see data that's changing. Because it would get this kind of stuff is hard. And the better approach, of course, is to avoid concrete models. which thankfully none of you should do. Maybe I should take that out of this talk, just so no one here is tempted and say, oh, this guy up there explained about concrete models. I'm going to try them out. Okay. All right, let's move on. The flip side is hacking MongoDB into Django. And Django is, unlike, let's say, FastAPI or Flask, is expressly designed to work with relational databases, which MongoDB is not. And it's easy to get started doing this. There's tools dedicated to doing it. And they get you through most of your use cases. And however, you're generally going to say goodbye to the third-party ecosystem of Django. And if you know anything about Django packages, that's a big draw for the tool. And also, the 5 to 10% of Django that it doesn't cover are now your edge cases. And edge cases are the hard part of code. And finally, there's maintenance. Every package ever written to do this at some point has become unmaintained. And then you have people who are stuck with years of code that they can't upgrade to new Djangos for, and which means they miss security patches. So don't do this. So the better approach is use MongoDB with FastAPI or Flask or whatever you want, just not Django. Okay, so we ran into this and a ton of other things at the time. And yeah, that's sarcasm. I was worried how sarcasm would go with the Lithuanian audience, but you all seem to get it. So the reality of the time was, with all this cleverness and growing sophistication, a lot of Django projects failed. It was astonishing. And in fact, most of our work in 2012 was being called in to rescue Django projects that had failed, which sucked because this is where the original developers would code things up in a really complicated way. Then they get stuck, and they would either A, leave, or B, they would, the funds for the project would run out. And then my wife and I would get called in because we were known Django experts, and we'd be invited in, and but there was we'd be paid a fraction, or the offer pay would often be a fraction of what we should have been earning, which was really, really frustrating and tiresome. And it got to be such an issue that I remember having huge rants about it online and in person. And finally, I was like, hey, a friend of mine made a suggestion, and my wife and I talked it over ice cream, and that was the genesis of our books. And we haven't released one in 4 years, which is why only a portion of the audience knows who we are. But typically when we do, people know who we are. But 2 Scoops of Django is a guide to best practices on Django. And when we initially started to release it, that's the red book on the right, there's a lot of the stuff in the books that was, you had to be a Django core contributor, kind of like with Zope, that we had gotten because we worked with Django core contributors quite a bit. But we collated the information, collected. A lot of it's gotten into the source code or the source docs for Django, as well as people blog and write or make videos based off content that we put together. But the lesson about that we learned is, we can change our community, like the culture of sophistication, by writing and coding about it. That we aren't powerless. It's not that we just have to sit there and rant. We can actually work on and make a difference. And I hope that's something that you all take from this, is that, and I'll get into this in a bit, that by encouraging simplicity over complexity, basically the Zen of Python, you can get others to follow your lead. So let's move on. Modern complexity. Let's get into types. Who uses Python types? Okay. So who likes Python types? So most of us do. But who here has had problems with Python types? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So as my coworker says, I like types, but they aren't always good. So for stuff like this is one of my favorite libraries. I mean, FastAPI and Pydantic are nice, but Typer. So what's amazing about this is for building a CLI app, and if you enter in the year from the command line, it's not a number, it won't even let you proceed. I don't need to code it up. It just magically happens because it's aware of the type. And the same thing with the path to the file. I don't have to code up, I don't have to check os.ch. No, that's a different thing. To figure out, hey, is this a valid path or not? Again, the type infers that this is perfection. This is so nice. Makes Python just so powerful and nice to work with. But while that is helpful, it's always the edge cases that get you. And for example, Django is an edge case for Python types. Django was creating an error where duck typing, where you could accept any type for anything, was great, and it's not going to change. So people have created a library called Django Stubs, which in theory addresses that, but it doesn't address everything, and every patch release with Django means that they have to update things. So yeah, if you're doing types in Django, it's kind of a pain. Maybe just use FastAPI. So types are, I will admit, types are decent at catching bugs. However, I've heard this statement before, and I've seen this where it's like, hey, I'll just use types because the types will catch all the bugs before they get to production. And that's the same as saying the ORMs help with protection against SQL injection, but if someone passes in, let's say, a different object ID than what you want, the ORM isn't going to do that and do anything about it unless you address it in your code. MyPy is slow. Who else has experienced this? Okay, yeah. So if you blow away, so MyPy does have a cache to help speed things up, but if you blow away the cache on a side project that I have, 93 lines of code takes 5 seconds. And if you're doing continuous integration against 8 million lines of code, which is what my company has a mono project on, or a mono repo on, then it takes a really long time for MyPy to get through it. So that's an issue. Also, upgrading MyPy can be really hard. Always make sure your MyPy is absolutely up to date. Don't let it drag. It'll be harder than you can imagine to get it back up to date. And it requires cleverness. I love protocols, typing protocols. Who here likes typing protocols? Am I just, okay. Yes, typing protocols family. But Zope had that too. Zope.interface is, if you even read the pip for protocols, it mentions that this code. Which makes me wonder, are Python types the Zope of the 2020s? Is it going to be such a blocker for Python that in 15 years no one will know what Python is? And I know that's a bit of a stretch, but maybe it will become a bit more obscure. Because if you look at the problems of Python types, they are an issue. When you add types, you have to deal with the edge cases. Sometimes you have to get really clever to get MyPy to work, and type checking is slow. So again, are Python types the Zope of the 2020s? Any thoughts? Hands up if you think they are. Okay, well that's one person. Okay, so I personally don't think so, and I mean we're all entitled to our own opinions. So, and I'd love to talk to you about yours, because unlike Zope, we have escape hatches. I use my personal projects. I use the any thing a lot, and at work, of course, we're forced to use typeignore quite a bit. So the lesson learned from this is desperate times call for desperate measures. Make sure that if you do add complexity if you are forced to do it, that you can get around it when times force you to. Because the thing is right now, let's say we have a project, we're all working on a project together with types, and it gets too, there's a bug, it's in production, and we have to deal with it. If we try to handle the types, it might take too much time. But if we can just bypass it really quickly and get a patch out super fast by using one of these escape hatches, that saves us. With Zope, that was an option. With types, you do have that option. All right, let's cover the final error, and then you can go on to the rest of the event. And this is not using Python for good. I am proud to say that my work has been used for a lot of good. My code, my books have been used to help people build dream projects, do research on medical stuff. It's helped with charities and nonprofits around the world, and even used to stop terrorism, which I know that's getting into politics. So I try to avoid. But my work has also been used for evil, and specifically the oppression of people. Within the US, it's used by certain firms to build spyware to be used on US citizens by police agencies. There's some really stupid stuff like, flat earth theory that have been built off of tooling that I've written. There was even an app to sell wildlife illegally. They tried to hire me. That's how I know about it. And to quote Malcolm, again, Dr. Malcolm, just because you can build a thing doesn't mean you should. I think it's something we should all think about. And there are questions I ask every time I consider employment in any capacity. First of all, is who's helped and who is hurt? And does, some sub-questions you ask are, does this promote truth or falsehood? Does it subvert democracy? Does it intrude on our civil rights? And finally, does it threaten the planet? Because I do get requests from fossil fuel companies. So in other words, does it hurt the potential for our children and grandchildren to have a life? A life that's in the comfort that we have. And so let's try this on climate change. So we've seen a series of incrementally hotter years, and the data supports this. Heat records are being broken all the time, and we have droughts in weird places. So I've lived for the past 13 years. Well, I moved in a year ago, but for 13 years I lived in Southern California. And every summer, this is a riverbed. The riverbeds dry up. Actually, they dry up in springtime. And this is standard for Southern California. But this isn't Southern California. This is France in 2022. France. I mean, I know that they kind of have a dry season when it gets hot, but I didn't know riverbeds dried up in France. That's not supposed to be a thing. So we know climate change is real. We know it's coming. And the question is, what can we do about it? Can we make sure that this goes into the recycle bin? And by the way, this will go into a recycle bin. But there's another way. So as I mentioned in our books, we learned that we can affect a change. Programming, writing software, it doesn't just affect us typically. It affects people around us around the world. And so I saw someone else here wearing a shirt saying this, which is awesome. But I believe programming gives us superpowers. Early on we learned that we could change our lives and those of our families. We could build new businesses. All those awesome people out there, that's what they're doing, to share knowledge, which is what we're doing here. But it also gives us the power to save the world. So my impact on climate change is minuscule. I can affect a change on myself, my wife, and my daughter. My wife fortunately agrees with this, so it makes it pretty easy when having arguments about whether or not to compost stuff. But that's it. That's all I can change. Maybe I can convince a few other people through vitriolic discussion. But as a software developer, working in the field of decarbonization and electrification, renewable power and all those things, this is how many people I am affecting today by working for the company that I do which has a focus on this. And I'm not alone in this. There's about 1,000 of us in this one company alone, and there's hundreds of companies in this field. And some of you might ask, hey, didn't you fly here? Isn't that an issue? Isn't that kind of ironic that you're flying here and talk about climate change? And yeah, you do have a point. I tend not to travel. This is probably one of only 2 conferences I'm going to because I don't want to do that. But this is my homeland, and more importantly, if I can convince one or more of you to move your career into this field, then this is the impact that you might have on it. So this is going to be my legacy. This is the only kind of work I'm doing for it because I am a father. You may see my daughter running around maybe later today or for the rest of the conference, but I'm doing this for her. I could go make more money working for Meta or Google if they would take me, but I don't want to. I want to electrify the world. I want to have energy abundance and a cleaner, greener future. I'm not saying that fossil fuels have to go away. For those of you who are in that field, go, oh, wow, he doesn't know what he's talking about. How are we going to deal with this or that? Sure, absolutely. Fossil fuels are useful in edge cases and for plastics and certain materials are useful, but they shouldn't be what we use for everything. So if you're interested, I'll have larger links later, or you can come up and ask. Climate Base is an organization which helps people find jobs in this field. And if you are in one of the octopus or kraken countries in which we have a formal business office, then you could come and work for me. Unfortunately, that's not Lithuania yet. I'm so sorry. But I guess my question is, what is your legacy going to be? Are you going to help a billionaire make another billion and buy another yacht? Or are you going to help me improve the world through hopefully what I'm doing, but something else like that? So about me, I'm Daniel Roy Greenfeld. I work at Kraken Tech. I'm as a coder. I write code and I write books at my little family company called felroy.com. My wife is Audrey Roy Greenfeld. She co-founded PyLadies and started the Cookie Cutter Project and did a whole lot more. My daughter is Uma, and I'm a superhero saving the planet. And this is my company. So thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Why did you leave NASA?
That's a really good question. It was a really hard decision because I'm a total space nerd. I left it because I got the opportunity to work with core Django and Python developers, and I always have kept the door open to return. So that's why I left. Also, as much as I love the agency, it's got 100,000 people and it's been around for 70, 80 years. It's a giant bureaucracy with everything that entails. So, simple, easy things are made hard, hard things are made nigh impossible. Yes.
So how would you suggest if I'm a developer who wants to start doing good for the climate or something like that, what would be the suggestion how to start? Maybe some organization, maybe some website?
Absolutely, great question. So the question is how can you get started in this? There's two. Unfortunately, these links aren't as big as I hope they are because of the screen issue. So probably if you're Lithuanian, then climatebase.org is a place to start. And when we do move into Lithuania, please consider applying for us. But also that company Gertum, who is doing IoT, What they are doing is something where they're affecting tens of thousands. I think they said 4 million people. Unfortunately, we lost that. So 4 million people, they can affect their energy usage through IoT. So through just running things more efficiently. So that's another option. I would go and talk to them and check out climatebase.org. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so imagine you're building a startup, and it's an early stage startup, and let's say it's a SaaS startup, software as a service, and you need to choose between Flask, Fast API, and Django. So which would be your choice and why?
Ooh, so the question is which one would I prefer?
Be fast, you know, it's natively fast.
Okay, so the question is I'm trying to repeat the questions for recording's sake. So the question is if I was going to choose a framework, which one would I pick? I want to iterate fast. Is it Django, Flask, or Fast API? Between those three, I would narrow it down to Django and Fast API. The advantage of Fast API is all the support for types, and it's just a really performant framework. The downside is if you want to have web pages, it's not, and user authentication through those web pages, it's not going to be as elegant as Django. You still can do it. In fact, I'm working on that now. I'd love to kind of come up with a tool, and Sebastian, who's the creator and maintainer of the Fast API project, him and I have talked about it, about coming up with a framework that would go on top of Fast API to do that, but I have not had the bandwidth to do much more than touch on it. So it really depends on your use case. So what I recommend that you do, though, is build a toy project in both Django and Fast API and see which one you think is more fun and go with that one. Because, yeah, you always do better on stuff you're having more fun with. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on the amount of energy that's used to train AI models these days?
Ooh, that's a touchy one. I was wondering when I was going to get that one. So the question is what do I think of the energy used to train AI models? If it's coming from renewable sources, it doesn't really matter. Or I guess maybe it kind of does, because you still have to deal with heat and stuff. But again, heat isn't that much if we're not warming it up with methane and carbon in the atmosphere. The challenge, though, is that for political and business reasons, not technology reasons, we're stuck on fossil fuels. So yeah, that is of a concern. And I've noticed that since the rise of AI, I'm not hearing so many complaints about crypto, which is kind of interesting. And again, I'm not saying anything good or bad about crypto. I'm just saying that was something that people flag. And it's funny how few people talk about that. I wish people cared about it more. And I do worry about it. Yeah, that's a complicated one. Someone needs to do, yeah, and it's hard to say because energy is not, I mean, electricity coming from different sources. I mean, it all turns into electricity, but when it comes from different sources, it's complicated. I do know that the giant crypto farms that have opened up in Texas, because I got invited in, and in Oklahoma, in the United States, all cover their buildings with solar panels. They, even though they are lured in with the cost of cheap coal electricity, which it isn't. Coal's expensive, and if it's not expensive for the consumer, it's because the state is picking up the cost. They cover their buildings with solar panels because they know, conditions can change, like economic conditions, and they have. Any other questions?
What about two scopes of Django? Because if I'm not mistaken, as you mentioned, there had been a 4 years delay between the last version, right? Yeah. So is it the time constraints which are maybe blocking the new releases?
Are you talking about that we haven't released a new one since 2020? Yeah. So we actually had been working on it with a publisher. We decided, hey, let's try a publisher for once, and we probably shouldn't have worked with the publisher. So we parted amicably with the publisher, and we may pick it up again. We're taking a respite before figuring out what we want to do. The thing is about, with 2 scoops of Django, it's over 500 pages of carefully vetted and analyzed content. And so the amount of work involved in getting it out the door is gigantic. So there's time constraints. It would be kind of nice to do it again. I mean, it's always fun. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I've got 2 more. Yes. Okay, we'll start. We'll go. I think you were first.
What do you think about Pythonizing?
About what? Pythonizing. Python. Oh, wow. I think Marco just told me yesterday that that's in Pandas. So Python, that is where you're kind of writing C, but in Python, correct? I mean, I think it's neat. And I've known a few projects that do it. The problem though is that Python has never really taken off, so it's remained obscure, kind of like how I was worried Python was in 1999. But the thing is I think these days there are more people interested in writing Rust extensions that then get picked up by Python than there are people writing Python to then be included inside of Python. That seems to be the community consensus. And the advantage of that is, this is just getting past the differences between the languages, would be that this way we're combining 2 communities, whereas with Python it's kind of like an offshoot of Python. So, yeah. Okay, and you, sir? Team lead and dash? Streamlit. I'm completely blank. I've heard the terms and I'm blanking on what Streamlit and dash are. Can you?
Dashboarding apps. So define your web page in code and lightweight frameworks, web frameworks for dashboarding.
Oh, so you mean like front end frameworks? Oh, I love front end frameworks. Sorry if I completely blanked there. No, I do like, so it depends on your use case, right? Like if you, I mean, I do like playing around with, server-side templates like Django templates and stuff like that. But one of the things is the front-end community didn't support making things like file uploads and very complex behaviors in the front end work with that elegantly. I think that's changed to some degree with the rise of HTMX. But if I have a front end project with a lot of complexity, let's say I'm trying to build a spreadsheet, doing that in Django templates is really hard. I know. I did that with djangopackages.org. It's really mungy code. So for that, having light. Am I answering your question? Okay. Yeah, so it really depends on your use case. You just need to make sure you don't use a hammer for every problem. Like, oh, there's a nail, I'm going to use a hammer, like the light front-end framework. Or there's a piece of wood I need to cut, I'm going to use a hammer on that piece of wood. It doesn't always work. So understanding both, I think, is a key to success, and being willing to learn both. If you are touching front-end stuff and you don't know both how to do things in Django or Jinja templates, as well as, I prefer lighter front-end web JavaScript frameworks like Next.js and I guess Streamlit and Dash or other ones. Then you're doing yourself a disservice. So, did that answer the question? Okay, I got a maybe. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that types in Python are getting pretty complex nowadays. How would you like to see typing in Python?
So the question is, how would I like to see Python in types in Python in a few years? Ooh, that's a good question, because I complained about and I didn't have a solution, which is unusual for me. So for starters, I'd like code. So that's a hard problem. One of the challenges with MyPy that we found at Kraken is that the source code is hard to work with. And all due respect to the people who work on it, because that includes that guy Guido who created Python, it's hard to work with. There's giant functions and there's been a few people raising it'd be nice if there was a Rust treatment for MyPy, and which I don't know how that would go over, but I think that's one of the biggest things is that if I make a change on something significant, I should not have to wait so long. I think some of the way it's documented is problematic. If you look at some of the Python docs, it really assumes you know what you're doing, and I don't know what I'm doing half the time. So I don't know. My Rust skills aren't where I want to be, but my documentation skills are. Maybe I'll give it a go. It's just I'll have to find someone willing to pay me to do it because it's a significant. I think it's going to be a significant contribution of time. Maybe I can get my work to do it because we're stuck on some typing issues. Any other questions?
How much time do we have until we all need to know Rust?
So the question is how much time? I would say you can do your entire Python career without knowing a line of Rust. So the advantage of having something like Rust is if you have a slow process, you can make it quicker. But if something's already quick enough, then why bother? And like, for example, with web frameworks, let's say you're building something with Fast API. If you start to force people to use Rust in your web development, it's going to. So here's the trade-off. Okay, let's start over. The trade-off, because this is a question I've been expecting to get, is like, do you work for a Python company? How much Rust are you using to save the planet? Because that doesn't save you energy. Isn't that saving us carbon? And the thing is we're in a race to fix the planet, right? And if we did it in Rust, we wouldn't have time. Rust just takes a lot longer to write. And I know the Rust stations say, oh, you can move pretty fast. Like, yeah, but in Python, you're going to be getting things done 3 to 7 times faster. And so that can't be discounted. So our friend over here who's asking me which web framework he'd use, the one thing I didn't say is, oh, go try this Rust web framework, because then they would run out of their funding, and then they call me in to fix it. So, but let's say our friend over here, they build out their project, they become a unicorn, they're saving, they're getting hopefully hundreds of thousands of people off of fossil fuels, but they've got this one piece that's slowing everything down. Maybe they rewrite it in Rust. They write a Rust crate, and then they use I can't remember the name of it. I'm blanking. Well, cargo is the thing, but I'm talking about the interface between Python and Rust, and then that's it's something like that. So they do that. They optimize, and that's how it should be. And that's what we're seeing with Rough and some of these other tools. Is it's like, hey, here's a bottleneck, but it's I/O. That's the bottleneck. I/O and string reading. Maybe. We have the rules. The rules aren't changing. This is a perfect candidate for Rust. So yeah, keep up with your Python. You will always have a need for Python. All right, I think we have. Yes, sir.
Speaking of lost opportunities, can you number a few things you think might become a lost opportunity in some 5-10 years? For some people, obviously, joining the company climate base might be a lost opportunity, but I'm speaking of tools, languages, since we've mentioned Rust a few times here. What, in your opinion, might be
So is the question?
lost opportunities in terms of technology?
So you're saying what things will fall out of favor and go away?
What things is worth watching
Oh, and what would be worth investing your time in? That's a fantastic question. So the question is what would be good investing your time into? For starters, just pure Python is great. The stronger your Python skills, the better. It means that, like right now, Fast API is king. Maybe it'll get dethroned and something else comes on, especially if you're in web development. So having strong Python skills rather than strong framework skills means that you can switch between frameworks pretty easily. And so with that, I advise people to become a little bit agnostic. Like, don't get super religious about Django or Fast API. Rather, get super religious about your Python skills or Rust skills. Let's see what else. Get good at types, and not because there is the issue of, oh my God, these edge cases. But as I pointed out with Typer and Fast API, Pydantic, and the competitors to all three of those, and a ton of other tools, when you use types to control behaviors in Python, it's amazing. And the more that we can leverage it for that, the better. And so if you ever have ideas for that, reasonable or crazy, try them out. That's what I would get. And focus on the simplicity of the API. So, and the other thing is relational databases. So.
Quick last one.
Last question?
Quick one.
All right, you, sir. What code editor do I use? I use VS Code. Thank you so much. This was an amazing set of questions. I've never had such good questions. Thank you.